Hey everyone, it's Patrick. Today we're going to do something quite interesting. We're going to find out how to create railroad or some kind of roller coaster tracks, right? So this is what the final thing will sort of look like, and we will start with something like that. So nothing more than a simple curve. So let's get right to it. So the most basic thing that we're going to use to create geometry that follows that curve is actually extrude, and then to have something travel over along that curve, it is a motion path animation keyframe technique. So let's take care of that double rail that travel along that curve. What I need to show you is when we draw curves, very often we don't get very uniform spaced control vertices. So but what's useful for us when we loft or extrude shapes along it or animate objects traveling along that curve is to have uniformly spaced and evenly spaced CVs, right? So draw your curves, and when you're done, what I want you to do is to go to surfaces. That's where we get our curve controls, and creating new surfaces. So go to, with your curves selected, if you really want to see what's happening, you can go to display. Under NURBS you can click CVs. So even when you're not selecting your objects, you can see where the control vertices are. I'm turning this on so that you can see before and after. Rebuild curves. Let's go into options, and number of CVs look like about this shape to be able to sort of describe it adequately without a loss of the integrity of the shape. I would say it's 20. So let's put it to, we want it to be uniform points and number of spans. So we put it at keep ends so that start and end points are the same, but otherwise all the curves in between are going to be spaced out uniformly. And we're going to say number of spans 20. I'm going to keep it at 3 cubics. So apply. I'm going to undo and redo, and you'll see that Maya has cleverly kept that shape as much as it can, and number of CVs are sort of rearranged and spaced out equally, with the exception of the front and the end, where because we ask it to keep the ends. All right, so that's all we're gonna do. So close it. So this is what we want, and now we have a shape that we can use, and we know that when we extrude our shape, our geometry, it won't be spaced unevenly. So that's the first thing. I'm gonna turn the CVs displays off. So off. Now we're gonna worry about that shape that we're gonna sort of extrude along the length of our spline. So what we need to do now is create NURBS primitives square. So the last two options, circles and squares, are merely splines, while the rest are actually NURBS surfaces, which actually renders. Splines do not render, so we're going to use square. Okay, and it gives us a group which has 4 individual NURBS splines. So this is not what we want. We actually want a complete shape. So what we're going to do is to attach them all. So as you can see, as we go down the shapes, you can see that they're sort of happening in a clockwise kind of direction. So that's the order that we're going to attach them. So sometimes we'll just carelessly attach like curves that are not joining together, and the attach operation will fail. So we want to select the first two in that order. Then we'll go into curves because it's a curves operation, and there's this attach curve. So I'll just click on the options, and usually I would keep original, okay, but since this is sort of a default square, because if we keep original, we'll like keep creating new objects while the old ones are there, and it gets quite messy. So I'm gonna not keep originals, and if I do blend, so I'm gonna just apply it so that you see what's happening. If I do blend, you see that these two curves are like sort of blended smoothly together. After you create it, you can go to attach curve and sort of turn blend into connect, which then will sort of keep that shape. Make note square has a history, so I'm gonna select them all and sort of delete history first. Select these two, gonna make a connect and apply. So then instead of two curves, it's become one. Then this is sort of the construction history kind of marker. So I'm gonna delete history again. So then that marker's gone. Shift select onto the next one, and I'm gonna do the same thing, attach and connect, and delete history, and select the last one, connect, delete history, and then now we just have a square like that. And I actually can just unparent it, okay, and that's my single square. And the second thing that we want to make sure it is, we want this square to be standing upright, okay, because right now it's lying down, and sort of the normal of this shape, it's pointing upwards or downwards, okay. So you could do this, but it changes your transformation. So the other thing that you can do is select all the points and hold down J, which snaps your rotation to 15-degree increments. So now this is I'm achieving a 90-degree by just holding down by this is free rotation, you don't know where it's ending up, but if you hit J and before you rotate and hold it down, you can achieve a 90-degree orientation to the shape. And when you select your square node, you can see that there's no rotation, and of course you can rotate first and then freeze transform later. So freeze transform is taking whatever rotation you have, modify, and freeze transform with options. It will reset your readings to 0 and your scale to 1, but keeping your shape rotated as such. So apply, you can see that everything is sort of zeroed and zeroed out, and but my shape is permanently in this orientation, taking this as the default. So I'm gonna undo that, get this square upright. Now of course we can do two ways. We're gonna extrude this square as a cross section and pull it along the length of our curve, and that would give us one part of the rail, right? But I'm a lazy and a greedy person. I'm gonna do all this in one. So what I'm gonna do is duplicate this, and I'm gonna move this guy to the second unit, and then I'm gonna move the other guy to also the second unit. So and what I'm gonna do is take these two guys and put their pivots both in the center. So this guy is has the pivot in the center, the second guy has the pivot in the center, and they both read 0 0 0, but it's not. I've translated it 2 squares, and I've translated this 2 squares, and so now I need to select these two cross sections and freeze transform so that they read 0 0 0. So apply, and they're sort of reset. Okay, now the principle behind this is so that we can treat these two as one object and sort of loft these two square as cross sections, so we have sort of two cubes, two pieces of geometry extruded in one shot at one go. So how are we going to do that when they are separate? So they need to be sort of under one object. So the way to do it is, if you're not showing shapes in your outliner, I want you to right click and show shapes. What we need to do is get this shape under this one group node, this transform node. So you might get a bit confused at first. When before we had like one object, and then once we show shapes, you realize that, hey, it's actually two different objects. That's top nubs square 1, and then you have top nubs square shape 1. So the truth is, whenever we think we're manipulating or selecting one shape, it's actually two things at once. So we have the transform node, which is that top node, and then when we're doing anything with create cube or changing the tessellation, this is actually the shape node. So the transform nodes know how to place the object in the scene, which point in space, facing which direction in orientation, and how big to scale, while the shape node actually contains shape information on the geometric, how the lines are being run, how the loops are, how many vertices, and the order of the vertex. So Maya internally keeps these two things quite separate, and each of them is performing their own function. So what we want to do is get this one of the square, this square, to also have a description of that form, and then we're going to delete this second square. So how we do this is just like parenting. In parenting, you would select the child, and then you would select the adult, and then you hit P, right? But what this does is sort of place one square under the other square, even the transformation. So that's not what we want. Okay, so I'm gonna undo. We only want to do that with the shape. So this, and then we're gonna run a simple mal command called parent add shape. Okay, so this parent and add is our normal parenting, which adds the first object selected to the second selection as a child, but we are enabling shape operation, so it's gonna take this shape and add that to the parent transform. So once I run that, you see that the shape has gone under, and this shape has not moved. So in essence, we actually created an instance. So if I sort of move this guy up, you can see that this object now has two shape under it. And if I go and do a shape transform, shape operation, like changing the shape of the shape, right? So if I select that and I sort of, you can see that two objects get selected, I get like change mode, and if I select something, the other guy also gets selected on top nub square 1. So this is showing you that it's actually the same object. So if I pull, you can see it's the same thing. So I'm gonna undo that. We've essentially created an instance. So having these two shapes in one object, I'm gonna delete or hide if you prefer. Okay, the second one, and now we have, if we don't show shapes, we only see top nub square 1. If I select it, I know internally that there are two shapes underneath. So that's all there is. And now we can do our magic. Select this square splines for our cross section. Okay, so let's name it square cross section, and the curve, I would name it path. So we'll select the cross section because we want to extrude it along the path. So cross section, and then shift select path. So the selection order actually matters. So we're gonna still in our surfaces menu set, we're gonna go into surfaces because we're gonna create new surface out of our source curves surface, and the operation is called extrude. So extrude with options. What you want is like that. You're gonna extrude as a tube. So okay, and the resulting position needs to be at the path, so going along the path. And then the pivot is the component pivot, which has been set to 0, 0, 0. So that center point is going to be sort of snapped and following that path, and with that 2 square sort of dragged around on the left and on the right, so we will have 2 squares like that. So, and then orientation is the profile normal, where you can try after you've extruded. So let's apply, and okay, so let me undo that. Okay, if you see this, there's actually more at the bottom. So you can by default it is a NURBS object. If you apply that, you'll see that you get some like jagged edges. So a NURBS is an approximation. You can hit number. You won't get enough resolution out of NURBS unless at render time you can sort of increase that, but that's not what we're gonna go for here. So undo. We want polygons, and in the beginning I was trying 200. We want to keep it as quads, okay, and we want to do count. So we want the resulting object to have 200 faces, right? You can try a few if you like, but you can see that it takes a bit of, if I do general, it goes a bit crazy. Okay, well, that's because of I could increase that to like 30, and so I still get sort of usable stuff if I try. But for me, what makes most sense would be the number of faces that results, and then I start with 200 and I apply. It looks like it's quite a nice result for me already, so I'm gonna stick with that. And you can see that because our cross section has 2 shapes, and it takes that cross section and sort of pulls it along, lofts it, so we have actually 2 rails going along like that. And the good thing, well, I don't know whether you find this desirable or not, is it banks sort of its when it starts off, it's sort of level, left and right is of the same level, and then when it goes and it's going to turn left, one side gets sort of higher than the other because it's sort of preparing to turn, and then after that it sort of turns back and all that. So you get some nice organic kind of differences between left and right like that. If you're gonna extrude, well, the other way you can do it is to have one square, one cross section, and just extrude one, and then sort of pull it to the left a little bit, and then extrude the same cross section on the same curve and sort of push it to the right a little bit by sort of like moving it. Then you will get exactly the same left and right. At every point you will get sort of level without one side going higher than the other. But because we're using 2, and there's a difference in left or right and right, and when it turns, the cross section gets sort of turned. Okay, so we realize that if we select 1, you get sort of extrude 1. So that's during our extrusion, even though we selected sort of one cross section in one object, it sort of did 2 extrudes with 2 different sets of parameters. So let's go and play a little bit around with that extrude. We can try to do put this to 0. It'll be all so the path is not fixed, but this looks good enough for us. The other one didn't make much difference. So rotation, if I select both and I go to extrude and I change the rotation, you can see that both the paths are, the extrusion of both paths are affected together. So if you really don't like that behavior when one is sort of higher than the other, and when it's banking, you know, so now they are sort of like slanted to one side. If you really don't like it, you can extrude them separately by dragging them like sort of horizontally. So it will be something like, okay, I'm gonna hide this for a while. You can sort of duplicate this one and then sort of move it horizontally a little bit. So then you'll see that at any time they are sort of horizontal. But the thing about this is it can get narrower at certain parts and then sort of opens up at some other parts and sort of narrower again, and then when it crosses back, depending on your shape, if it sort of comes back again, you get sort of intersection like that. So and I'm gonna unhide this again, and very quickly I'm gonna show you, if you're gonna do two shapes separate of each other, what you can do is make a duplicate of the path. You can do an offset of the curve, and you can apply, and you can see that I'm just gonna concentrate on these two paths here. The other path is offset, and you can choose an offset distance of like maybe 15 or 10, and you can see that sort of it's offset the curve for you, so you end up with like sort of two curves, and you don't get that sort of that banking one curve being very much higher than the other, although I suspect there might still be, yeah, it looks like it's sort of better than whatever I have in terms of like every part of the track is level. You don't get sort of a veering of banking to the left and what. So so it really depends on what you want. But I'm gonna stick with, okay, this is the more extreme situation where later on the car or the train will be sort of going to the left and then going to the right. So well, it's more exciting and it's more challenging. So I'm gonna stick with this. Then the next thing, okay, so we're sort of halfway done already because we already have that track that goes along. So now for that challenge where we're gonna have the rungs that connect the tracks, right? So now we're gonna build a cube. So that's gonna be a one rung around, which is at the length, it must be as long as, and be able to be long enough to bridge that gap. So what I'm gonna do is sort of like drag it along a curve. So I'm dragging it along that curve, sort of snapping to and going to the very beginning of the curve, because it's a good and convenient location for me to gauge how much to scale my cube. So I would expect X to be left and right direction, but looks like I would expect width to extend left and right. So it means the orientation of my whole scene is sort of not what I expected to be, but no matter, we can make do with this. So I am sort of scaling this guy to touch the center of the square cross section on each side. So maybe later on, just in case the distance between this sort of narrows a little bit, it doesn't jut out this way, or if it sort of decide to move a little away from each other, sort of the gap sort of gets bigger, I still have some allowance here for it to for it not to show the end of the my piece here. Okay, so this is about that size that I want to, and I'm going to increase subdivisions. What I want to do is, well, this is intersecting that shape, right? I sort of actually want a loop here so that I can sort of know, maybe I can inspect as it goes across the length. Along that length, I want to see whether it's keeping that relationship, whether it has become wider or it has become more narrow. So this was the depth. So subdivision depth, I'm going to put 3, 4. So I have a center one, and then these two are evenly spaced out. Now I'm going to delete history. Okay, this is good enough for me. I'm going to sort of select the loop, and then scale them so that they touch both sides. So it's sort of touched already. So that's what I'm gonna do. So then if it's suddenly the gap opens too much here or too much here, I know that maybe they're not following these two are not really following the curve or something like that. So and then the rest I would sort of maybe scale these guys. Remember, yeah, scaling, non-standard scaling, non-default values are, if you want to do any kind of rigging or any kind of prop setup, is quite dangerous because it might transform in a way that you don't expect. So I'm gonna go into my vertex and sort of scale them down to what I want, and without disturbing the scale. But let's say I am going to do object level, and then I'm sort of scaling it down, and I'm happy. What I can do afterwards to reset it, of course, is freeze transform, and I don't want to set this position as 0, 0, so I'm not gonna do anything with rotate and translate, but I do want to reset my scale. So that's what I'm going to do, scale and apply. So scale gets freeze, the transform of scale gets frozen to the default at this shape. So if I do any kind of crazy transform like that and I totally lose my shape, all I do now is all I need to do is hit 1, and then it goes back to that default shape, that transformation. So this is really important and a really good tool to have. Okay, so and if I go back to 0, I bring back my shape to 0. If I would have frozen transform back then, if I 0 out, it would sort of jump back here, which is not what I want. So after being quite happy with what's happening, what we want to do now is to do a motion path to bring this guy on a journey along this, throughout this the animation duration. So now I need you to take a look at your time range a little bit. It sort of will affect, well, let's not look at the time range first. Let's just do a motion path. So I'm gonna select this object that's gonna be brought along, and then shift select my curve. Okay, then I'm going to go into animation and animate motion paths and attach to motion path. If I go into options, I'm going to you can leave these, you can reset, so these are the defaults, and I would do bank, okay, so that when same thing as it follows this and is preparing to turn left and preparing to turn right, it actually sort of rotates and banks with in the horizontal orientation in preparation to turn. So we can keep all that and apply. So when we apply, we can see these channels are sort of locked up and engaged because the motion path is now driving them. You can see that this guy is sort of going along. Okay, so to really see what's happening, I'm gonna create a camera. Okay, and because from our perspective view, like now, it's either too small so that we can't really see what's happening. So I'm gonna get this camera, look through this view. What I just did was middle mouse drag, and it will look through this. So while we are tumbling our view, we are actually moving that camera. So let's say I'm happy with framing my observing camera like that. I'm going to parent this camera to my cube. So what's happening is that my camera here, because it's parented to the cube and the cube is moving along that track, my camera is going to be observing the cube, so it's like a follow cam. So let's switch to that camera and sort of take a look at what that cube is doing. Okay, so that's the end of the journey. And okay, so there's some like banking, there's some turning and all that. So right, so let's switch back to our perspective camera, and what we want to do is duplicate this guy at every. What we can do is like sort of go to frame 5, okay, and duplicate the cube, but the camera is under the cube, so now that's not what we want. So I'm just going to use that cube and sort of parent constrain to the camera, just so that we can sort of, okay, parent constrain with maintain the offset. Okay, so now my camera is still following. Oops, looks like it's not really working, so I'm going to forget about it and just leave my camera alone for a while and delete the parent constraint. So what we're gonna do is animation snapshot, which essentially is doing frame 5, duplicate the cube, maybe frame 8, do a duplicate of that second cube, duplicate, and then yeah, frame at frame 10, duplicate again, and it's gonna go on and do that for the entire length without us having to manually do that. So okay, so how we set this up would be select that this object that is animated, okay, and under animate you have the create animation snapshot. So what this is doing is it's having a frozen copy of that animation at different point in time, so it sort of leaves a disconnected trail, or a sort of like a dead trail. Okay, so we'll have to, what we do is animation snapshot, and with options I'm gonna follow my time slider 120 frames and increment, that's every 1 frame. So let's try every 2 frames, and then leave a duplicate 2 frames, leave a duplicate at that position, and then 2 frames, so that will advance somewhere forward and leave a duplicate. So apply. So you see what we end up with is a copy of that. Okay. One thing you notice is that there are more rungs here at the beginning and more rungs here at the end. That is because we have an ease in and ease out when we created this motion path. You can see that this piece sort of, when you play, it's sort of easing in into that maximum velocity, okay? And when it reaches the end, it sort of slows down into a ease out. Okay, so it sort of slows down. Okay, so that's not what we want to do. So let's go into let's go into that P cube and the motion path that's controlling it, and there's a keyframe set and this start frame, end frame. That's how it is possible to animate it. Okay, so end frame is 1, start frame is 0. So if we go into our graph editor, we will see that indeed there is a ease in and ease out. So that's what we don't want. We want evenly spaced rungs. So I'm gonna hit this, and notice interestingly, when undo and redo, and this relationship is live. That means that when we change the speed of that motion curve, these copies actually update their spacing and update their position based on what that piece is at that point in time, which is really convenient. The next convenient thing is it created a snapshot group for us, and then it sort of grouped all of the transforms. It sort of copies it in numerical order for us. So if we sort of step through by using the right button and the left button, it's really sequentially duplicating that for us. So that's really a good thing. The other good thing that this setup has is that throughout all our construction, if I click on this main curve, right? When I click on this main curve, all the things that are purple and highlighted in color means that they have a live relationship with this curve that we are selecting. That means if I sort of go in and alter that curve, okay, my two rungs are going to follow along. Now I was hoping that okay, let's try. So my two rungs are going to follow along. Let me do something first. This motion path snapshot. And okay, let me just delete this snapshot and just try and do. I think I might be able to get it to update interactively. So this guy and this guy, do a snapshot and update. Always update. Okay, and then I'm gonna do this exactly the same thing. So you get that, and it's already evenly spaced out because we already fixed our motion path on the ease in and ease out. The next thing that we might see is the spacing of that rungs are maybe a little bit too far apart from one to the other, to the other, to the other. So we're gonna make the increment, this increment more frequently. So undo that and increment every frame, so it leaves a copy of that rung, duplicate of that every frame. So apply that, and you can see that it's more number of rungs. And okay, so now I go to my main, because I'm using always update. Let's see. I'm gonna change the shape of my. Okay, it's not updating, so yeah. But anyway, we can always let's say if I've changed my shape and my first piece is still sort of updating and going along the new shape. So all I need to do, if I needed to sort of update this collection of rungs, I can just delete and select this guy again and increment one frame and there we have updated for us. Okay, so I'm gonna undo that to before I change my shape. Can I update this? So it looks like it's following the old one. Yeah, so what just happened was I managed to make it, force it to update by changing the node state, and then I didn't have to delete or re-execute that. So let me try that again. I'm gonna pull this down, okay, and then I'm going to that snapshot and then change this to has no effect, and then so it sort of snaps to that new shape. Okay, so undo to get back my original shape, and then yeah, so right, so we're almost there. Okay, yeah, it seems like a easy task, but looks like it's more than meets the eye. So, and the second thing that we realize is that at certain point these two rails are sort of supposed to be sort of tilted at an angle, but these rungs are not really following. Okay, so what should we do about that? What can we do about that? So it's a little bit of problem solving and in the area of rigging as well. So this is not working out at those points. Of course, I can go into each one of them and sort of try and, or you can't try and, yeah, the thing about this is that it's not preserving the center of that piece for you. All the transforms, if you move them around, all have their centers at 0, 0, 0, which is the world origin. Okay, so that didn't work out. I'm gonna go around and do an alternative method that will work. So delete that snapshot group, and that snapshot node will be deleted together as well. So instead of getting this guy to travel along that path like that, because the path also, motion path also has its own banking, okay, and I can also limit that bank to like 40 degrees, so when it sort of turns, when in preparation to go over the other side, it doesn't sort of exceed 40 degrees. So this can be like more gentle, or you know, more violent, depending on how you want it. But I think it's never gonna match up exactly to how it is. Well, if you want to manually do it, we still can. So for example, this is at this point is matching. Yeah, so we could sort of we have a sort of front twist, up twist, side twist if you want to. So we can key all these values if you want. So, and then the bank scale, this front twist is our banking also. So I could sort of set a key and then go up someplace where sort of it doesn't fit anymore. So this part is going up. So I'll just do this and then set a key also. So then from the first keyframe to the next keyframe, sort of is always staying in between. And then after doing all that, and make sure that all the in every frame it's sort of staying within and not jutting out. Okay, twist it like that. Then we can do our animation snapshot, and then every frame that it will be in and it won't be jutting out. So that's not what we're gonna do again. I'm sorry to disappoint you. So what we want to do is delete that motion path. So not going to follow that motion path for now. So so to do that, select this motion path and then just hit delete on your key. And now when we sort of move our timeline, this little guy is not following along that path anymore, and there are non-zero rotations, so let's go and zero them out so this is facing correctly in that position again. Now what we want to do is, what if we had, instead of just one motion path, we had two guiding motion rail guiding path that follow the side of these rails, so then it could sort of guide this guy when one side goes up a little bit more than the left, or the left side goes down a little bit more than the right. This little guy it can still touch both sides. So that kind of behavior would need a guide rail on both sides that actually follows and runs through the center of each, wouldn't you say? So the easy way to do this would be to go and select the ring, okay, where I've sort of selected the inner side of the whole length of my path, okay, and I'm going to insert an edge loop in dead in the center of, so you can do that by going to insert edge loop, if I'm not wrong, so polygons, edit mesh, insert edge loop, insert, yeah, these tools get moved around in the menus, especially in these few versions of Maya. So insert edge loop tool, and you can sort of click it, but it's hard to be dead center of that. So that's what we want. So what we can do, that's the last tool used. You can double click and you get tool options, okay, and you can do equal distance from the edge, and so when you click, looks like it's not working. So the way I'm used to doing this, well, if you're used to doing this and you know how to do exactly at that distance, please go and do it the way you're used to. So what I'm gonna do is shift right click, and there's this insert, no, sorry, control right click, to edge ring and split. So I'm already I've already got the edge ring selected, so and split, so that gives me exactly in the center and following that the whole length of the inner face, okay. Then and what's good about this is, again, there's a live relationship between that edge split. So if I move my path, which in turn is affecting the two, okay, I would move that shape and that edge loop would still be applied after that shape updates itself, okay. So next thing would be the same thing, edge ring and insert. So then now yeah, so we get edge rings and updating at the same time. So now what we want to do is get these loops into, extract them so that they become curves themselves. So now I need two individual guide curves, so I'm selecting them again and modify, convert poly edges, yeah, poly edges to curve. So leave it like that, best guess and cubic. So apply it, and you can see that I have a new curve. If I move it a little bit, you can see that it's lying exactly on top of this, and if I select my polygon, you can see that the curve again has a live relationship to that polygon that created it. So again, if I move my main shape, that guide curve is going to update as well. So that's the amazing thing about Maya and all procedurally based 3D software. So again, from this newly split poly curve, I'm gonna use my modify, do the same thing, poly edge to curve. Okay, using that last option, so I didn't need to go into the configuration to configure my options. So we have let's call it path guide left, path guide right. Okay, and I'll put them together with this, and now we have two paths that's sort of like spin-off, which derived from the first path. Okay, and how do we now, the next thing would be, how do we make this little guy follow and bank together even when we have two guide paths? So what we need to do now is create nulls. So I like nulls. So nulls is your friend. Locators, sorry, yeah. So in Softimage it's called nulls. In After Effects it's called nulls. And what we want to do is this null is in 0, 0, 0 space. I want it to be the same place as where the cube is. So yeah, so I can use the cube and then go into my animation, constrain, point constraint, and it will be exactly at the center of the. Okay, so then this is just an alignment kind of tool, so I can, after the constraint, I can just delete that, and it'll be, we know that it's dead center where that transformation pivot was. So what we want to do is maybe we want to sort of have a few more cuts. Okay, so we can, there's somewhere for our locator to sort of snap to. So I want to snap to vertex, okay, and sort of snap to, so let's isolate this Shift I and the locator, so Shift I again. So we want to make sure that the locator is snap to this edge loop, and then duplicate that locator and sort of snap to this edge loop as well. So it's a simple, how we're going to achieve this thing is a simple look at constraint. So we want to get this now, okay, to be the parent of, so path guide left, so it's the left locator. Okay, let's make this cube the child of the left locator. So I'm going to just simply just put it in, and then this locator, let's get out of my isolate mode. This locator is going to follow the left guide path, okay, and it's no coincidence that I chose to cut an edge loop around here. So now we can see that it's useful. We can sort of use that to align that locator, snap to, and by using this sort of using that guide and travel around that left along that guide path on the left. So locator, guide path left, and back to my animation, animate motion path and attach the motion path. So let's see where it went. So 0, so at 1, so 0, it started from the other side of the motion path. Okay, so what can we do about that? What we can do is actually sort of reverse the animation keys if we wanted to. Okay, so I think we should reverse, or we can go into this and sort of reverse that path direction, the curve direction, but it's already got quite a lot of input, and in the motion path it's just easy for us to sort of go into the graph editor and sort of reverse that. So you can see that there's this ease in and out again, so this is not what we want. So on this one where the value is 0, we just put 1, and in the last keyframe the value with a value of 1, just put 0, and we would have a reverse curve. So now on the first frame we get it's the position is in this end of the curve, and then at the very end it's at the other end of the curve. So this is what we want. However, it got rotated the other way, so which is a simple thing to sort of rotate it back. At first it's quite tempting to sort of just rotate, but again our pivot is here. Of course we can also set our pivot to snap to and sort of rotate 180 degrees to get back to whatever it is, but we're not going to do that at this point because we're going to do a look at constraint, which is going to take over that rotate anyway. Okay, so the next thing actually we could do is to let it not bank. So motion path, so there's this banking going on. That means this locator is gonna be like twisting and all that, but we don't want the locator to twist, and we're going to use a look at on this guy, so any twisting and rotation on the locator would be just wasted computation on the computer anyway. So now let's the same thing, do the right guide path, let this locator travel along. Okay, so that's bad grammar, I know. So right locator and guide path, and do the animate attach to motion path. So and you on this side you get to see that on 1 is on the correct side of the curve, and then on 120 is also on the correct side of the curve. So it looks like on our left rail the order of the geometry was reversed. Okay, so now that we have not quite, we have this motion path also with the ease in and ease out, so we gotta fix that also. So select that and make it linear. So then you can see sort of both locators are traveling in together at the same position, not quite at the same position. Okay, because of the length of the like maybe this guy is turning wider than this guy, so we may still need to sort of insert additional keyframes when the distance difference is too big. So like sort of in one, increase it by tiny quantities, but let's undo that. So we went back to just having 2 keyframes on the on this side. There is one more attribute on motion paths to try, that is parametric length. There is a difference, I can't really remember. So it's I think one is dependent on the spacing on the CVs, then the other one is actually counting depending on the actual length of that spline, regardless of whether it's turning a tight corner or not. So let's try and do a parametric length on that one. So it seems that parametric length made the distance further apart, so let's not do the parametric length. So let's just try it like that and see. Yeah, actually we don't need to see because we know that it's not really following. So we go to looks like we will need to do some basic keyframes. So go to my graph editor. Okay, and let's observe what's happening at each point of the journey. Okay, a little bit tedious, I know, but it still beats going to every of the rung and try and fix that follow and banking, wouldn't you say? Okay, so now at the beginning both sort of start off at the same point, which is good, and then at sort of here there seems to be some discrepancy, and we know for a fact that when there's a turning wider and an inner curve, that probably is going to be the point where the differences are the most obvious. So we want to go to that point where the distance is the furthest apart, and sort of insert a keyframe, key selected, and there we have our keyframe, and sort of shift the value until sort of they're the same. And so once we get that, I believe that all the values in between would yield. Okay, over here you get some as well. So insert a keyframe selected and do a little bit of this, and then you get sort of them traveling parallel again. So let me very quickly just let me not bore you with this. I'm gonna pause the recording for a while and finish all that. Hi, so I'm back, and I've sort of fixed it, and you can see that the fixing is not really a lot, but because of that length of our rail, a little bit sort of makes quite a big difference. So now finally we're going to sort of make that locator look at, okay, the locator is sort of tied down, so I'm gonna make that cube look at the other locator. So how we're gonna do this is going to the cube's object space and find out which, okay, just now I sort of let me center that locator first. Oh no, let me just move that. Just now I sort of moved that pivot to snap to this, the top part. So what I just did was, because this is still sort of aligned to world space, world orientation, I snapped it to here and then snapped it in Z to this, so it sort of maintains in the center of the geometry. Okay, so because if the pivot was here and I was looking at that, you can see that it's not in the center, so that's not what I want. But now when it's in the center and it's looking at this guy, we get a parallel kind of orientation. Okay, so that was my bad, and I might be happy with this, so I might again going to reset my transform, not reset but freeze transformations on my rotation. So sorry, on my translation, because it's non-zero, so now it becomes 0 again. Then looking at my local space, I need to get get Z, looking that Z axis, okay, looking at this locator right. Okay, so locator right and the cube. So locator right, then control select that p cube 1 and go into constrain, orient. Then we know not orient, sorry, aim constraint. So we know what axis we wanted to look down on. The aim vector would be Z, okay, and the up vector is Y. Let's try that. Okay, so apply, and you can see that it's already done. So let's try and sort of bring it a few frames forward and see what's gonna happen. And what we are seeing is at every frame, this left guide is bringing the cube along, right? And the right guide is providing the cube a vector to look at, a direction to look at. So okay, so it's gonna stay like that for the entire trip. Okay, so let's again take a look with that camera. I'm gonna parent that observer cam under this guy again and look through that cam. So as we go, we can see that there are some areas where the other guide is still ahead. So if I wanted to, I could still go back to my graph editor to see where that discrepancy is. So here it was pretty bad, so I could add another one and move it so that it's sort of parallel again, because that was quite a tight turn there. And okay, so this might be a good way to work once you've set things up. And have a camera follow that piece of rung as it's traveling across. So here, yeah, it looks like I need to update this value. Sorry, I'm making you guys watch again. So remember that one. But I believe this would be sort of quick. So okay, so the next thing actually would be you can see at some point it's sort of pointing towards and pointing upwards. So if you know about the aim constraint, there's a third vector that can be oriented to the object up if I wanted to. So I could have a third object. Oops, got my orientation. I'm still controlling my camera. So I'm doing the left bracket to go back to my initial. So that's like step back through the viewport. Okay. Yep. So I'm gonna step out of my camera and stop controlling my view observer cam. I'm gonna bring it out again. Okay, and so let's say yeah, so it's up to you. Like for example, is when it's going up on an incline, the up is trying to, the aim constraint is trying to maintain a world up. So that's not very helpful for us. Okay, and you see that both my locators are actually pointed up the correct way. So if I actually wanted to, and probably is the case, I would want another locator to be defining the up axis of this, instead of using world up. Okay, so I'm gonna delete off. I'm sorry, this video is getting to be quite long, but yeah, I think we're on to something here, which is quite exciting, and sort of figuring out how to sort of fine-tune as problems crop up, right? So now you can see that they're sort of pointing upwards, but this guy is our guy is pointing up to world y-axis. So again, we want to follow. Let's take a look at our aim constraint options. We can follow the world up vector, or we can follow, let's take it, we can follow the up vector of another object. So object rotation up. So let's try that. Okay, so back to how we set this up. The right guide and then the cube, and we already have that blue arrow, which is the z-axis looking up, and instead of this world up vector, we can do a object rotation up, and this the rotation of the object would be our same object, path guide locator R, and where that its up axis would be this object's up axis, I presume. So apply, and you can see that now it's sort of following this guy's object up, right? Now let's go into our observer cam. I think it's gonna work. What do you think? So cam, and you can see it's now mostly following how the object's pointing. We don't see any more big discrepancies, right? Get out of my, and I'm going to that steep incline where we saw that problem in the first place, and you can see that now this guy is sort of behaving itself. Okay, maybe not for in this axis. So yeah, I think that'll be the final touch before we sort of duplicate that and call it a day. So value on the graph editor. Go set another key. Look through my camera again. Here is pretty extreme as well. Okay, so those times where it's not exactly perpendicular to the curvature, we can attribute it to man-made inaccuracies, and which gives it an even more organic feel. So now we've managed to solve all our problems, I think. And having said that, everything is dependent on everything for when we change that shape and all that, but the fact that I had to manually adjust this U value to make the rungs parallel to each other would mean that if my shape changed, then I would have to rekey all the values to make the rung sort of parallel to itself all over again. So it's not very procedural at this stage. I think this is the only stage that it's not very procedural, but all the other stages, the guide rail and the they would sort of follow those edge loops and the guide and those two guide locators. They would follow accordingly. Okay, so that gives you great flexibility. Before I say that, let's just go and duplicate that first. So animate, so our final step here, animation snapshot and apply. So that's the easiest part of it, and you can see that all our rungs, because it's taking as a snapshot in time, duplicating that object, we trust that we won't have any rungs that are sort of sticking out and not following. Okay, so it looks pretty good to me. And when we're done, of course we will hide all these and group it on. I like to call it construction. Okay, group, and hide that group. And oops, we have that extruded surface which we need. And because this has a live connection and all that, I would like to duplicate that. Okay, so all we need is maybe even the snapshot group, because it had a live connection. So we sort of bring all that into the construction group. Okay, and I'll duplicate that snapshot group as well, and then also bring that snapshot group into the construction group, and then what we have left would be our geometry group. So snapshot group, actually I think it's a set. So yeah, so there we have it. If we want to sort of continue, the next things that we could do is to manually sort of select faces. This is a bit manual actually, so let me save my file first. Okay, so like 3 squares and then 1 and then 3 squares, and then I'll select the next one. So every 3 faces I select 1. So then we can then sort of extrude 2, 3. So what we can then do is sort of create an extrusion and sort of push it down. Okay, so that's our structure. And we can sort of select the vertex. Oops. Okay, now we convert our faces into selected vertices, sort of snap it to deselect this and snap everybody to, okay, we need to be in wall space, we need to not keep spacing, and snap everybody to the similar Y direction. Okay, and similarly do the same thing for 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you don't want to do that, then you have to manually create columns and sort of duplicate them, orientate them, and scale them up so that they sort of touch the faces. Okay, so convert to deselect, snap to. Okay, something like that. So there you have it. Yeah, I hope well, you learned something. I learned something about how some of the tools work. So the more you work with it, the more you know how it's going to perform and react, and the higher possibility whatever theories that you have will work the first time round. Yeah, so it was my pleasure. I hope you enjoy it, because I did. See you next time.